Hi, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. So let's start the webinar. Today, we're going to talk about fast and easy SAP test automation or SAP test automation with SQAI Suite. Seb and Dean, who joined us as speakers, are going to take over in just a minute. Let me pull up their slides and they can introduce themselves to you guys. Huh? Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jörg. So indeed, today Brightest joins hands with SQAI to give you some insights on how to enable AI for a fast and easy SAP automation solution. So first of all, let me introduce you to my colleague Dean.
Thanks, Seb. Yes, so hi, everybody. I'm Dean. In my personal life, I'm father, husband, a dog lover, and when I'm not home, you will most likely find me on the bike somewhere. But more importantly, my professional life, I've been for over 18 years in software quality now, and I'm one of the founding members at SQAI Suite, an AI product we are very enthusiastic about to bring you in this session. My main focus at SQAI Suite is to make sure that our users, our customers, have everything they need to succeed with our product and make sure that their feedback gets back to our tech team.
Yeah. Thanks, Dean. And then myself, I'm 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗴. I'm domain lead functional test automation at Brightest. Currently going to 14 years even in test automation. And I aim to design durable test automation solutions. And I'm also at 𝗕𝗿𝗀𝗀 College lecturer, where I'm where they so graciously invited me today to host from. So yeah, having our introductions done, let's kick it off. So why we are here, why SAP automation is different, why it's not just any automation project. And then we dive into both solutions, first from Brightest side, how we can do it. And then we dive into the SQAI side. And then we join hands and make the Brightest and SQAI solution, and we'll end off with demo and of course questions if there are any. So let's first start with SAP. So there are two phases of SAP. So you have the classic SAP GUI and the Windows client, which is a desktop application with a lot of custom non-standard controls, and there's no Microsoft UI automation support. And this will be important later on. And it's also heavy dependent on SAP specific APIs. So that's the SAP GUI. But on the other hand, you also have the SAP Web, where we have Fiori, we have the Web GUI, we have several SAP Cloud solutions, which are browser-based, but have a very dynamic DOM with a lot of generated IDs, especially Fiori, with many, many unstable attributes. And you have those different UI stacks, each with their different automation pane. So if we could dive a bit deeper into the GUI automation, SAP GUI is not a typical Microsoft app because the controls are non-standard. And if you want to go into automation, we want to have stable results. We have to have that stability, and to enable that stability, we need resilience. And resilience means stable selectors, fallback scenarios, and so on. Now, to get those elements, to get that resilience, well, we need to inspect it. And SAP inspection is tricky at best. And as I said before, there's no Microsoft UI automation support. So many tools like 𝗕𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗴, for example, they rely on this. So you immediately, because of that architecture, you have a lot of tools which you just can't use properly. And some tools then say, okay, let's mitigate some of these things by adding OCR and adding image recognition. But again, those aren't stable. Image recognition, you might need to fiddle around with how severe you want it to be. A bit too much image recognition becomes unstable. A bit too less recognition, and well, you have a very unstable script as well. So the goal of test automation isn't just automating scripts. We want reliable execution, and more importantly, in real-life conditions. And then we go over to the SAP web. Also, that unfortunately isn't easy mode. Although it's web, we have our inspection tools and we have the element inspector from any browser, but the DOM itself is highly dynamic. You have a lot of generated IDs, which could change anytime you load up SAP. You have a lot of asynchronous loading, you have busy indicators and so on. That makes typical automation, web automation, tricky. Moreover, you also have on top of all of that, the iframes, pop-ups, session management, and heavy backend round trips. So yes, although it's browser-based, it's not a typical web app. And usually when we approach automation projects, we look at the automation families, right? So you have low or no code on one hand, which is commercial tooling, and it sacrifices some flexibility for ease of use. It's easier to use because it's low code, but you sacrifice that flexibility because now you're stuck with whatever the vendor offers. If you want to build something extra, you can't, because that's how the vendor created the tool. And still, although it's low or no coding, it often still requires some coding, also comes with certain cost, license cost or purchase cost. And of course, you have a vendor lock-in. If you, for example, I wrote Tosca, LeapWork, UFT1, if you create your automation solution, in LeapWork, for example, if you then want to switch, well, you have to start over again, because there's no way to take all of your scripts and just export them to another solution. On the other hand, we have pro-coding frameworks where we use mostly open source libraries, which is usually also a custom framework. And you can build this in basically any language you want. Sometimes, of course, you need some additional things you need to consider and so on. And this setup, it sacrifices your setup time and user friendliness for flexibility and low cost. You need to set up your framework, you need to introduce those wrappers, you need to build that architecture. But what you get is you can do whatever you want. Examples here, of course, Selenium, which is very well known, Cypress, Playwright, Appium, but also tools like UFT Developer, which is also pro-code, but license-based. And in SAP contexts, when we put the low-no code and the pro-code, we see that in low-no code, we often or sometimes have those SAP integrations built, but we see that those tools struggle with complex custom flows. And your very resilience of your solution depends on the vendor roadmap. If you need something to behave slightly different because that adds resilience, well, then you need to pray that your tool vendor supports that or is going to add that in the future. And if you go to pro-code, in SAP context, you have maximum control and you own that resilience problem. If you want to build something else because that makes it more stable, you can do that, but at a much higher engineering effort. So those are the two families we can usually consider. And as an example here, I took Tricentis Tosca, because you can't talk about SAP automation without mentioning this. It's the enterprise test automation platform with a model-based approach and SAP support, and it has very strong SAP positioning and also uses this standardized approach. But as drawbacks, of course, there's the license cost and the vendor dependency, but we see that if you have customization in SAP and so on, it can very quickly become very, very complex. And scaling also needs high governance. Of course, there is this learning curve, but we've noticed that in Tosca, it's pretty steep. It's not always as intuitive, and although it's low code, it still requires technical depth. So on the other hand, we have our brightest test automation framework and the ProCode family. And it's a TypeScript-based framework, and it's built with years of experience and clients in different sectors and SAP landscapes. It's basically a team effort from Brightest that gets all of the feedback from clients, all of the struggles, and we created one uniform framework across several objects in one solution. And we have that full flexibility because it integrates with modern dev tool chains. And because it's open code, there's no vendor lock-in. If you want to change something, well, you can do that because you have the code in front of you. And for long-term scaling, because you have that full control, it works really, really good. Here, we also have hybrid fallback strategies. Like if, for example, some element isn't stable, we can fall back to things like OCR or image recognition, but only as a fallback and not directly based upon it. It also controls non-SAP systems such as mobile, web desktop APIs, and even hardware integration, which is something that other tools don't offer. Of course, this also comes with a trade-off. It's not only a good news show because it requires coding capabilities. And you need to understand code. You need to be able to write code to make use of the framework. And of course, since everything is open, governance is key. And we need to protect that architecture. We need to have reviews. You need to have test data, coding standards, and so on. And this is just tooling, but basically the real cost of automation isn't just your tool setup, it's the bottleneck that follows, because you have to model those business flows, you have to define and maintain objects, you have to have some actions on the test objects which you want to abstract because you want to reuse it as much as you want. And test cases still must be translated into a flow. So the real bottleneck is not execution, it's setup, flow creation, and stability. And that's where we want to reduce that friction as much. And friction in practice within test automation and the identifying and defining of stable objects. We have some low-level interaction code, which we will always need to write. Maintaining selectors, duplication of code, synchronization, and so on. That's actual friction. That's where we get a lot of value if we can reduce that. Because the problem is not writing a test, the problem is engineering it properly. Because anyone can take like a screen recorder or whatever and do some actions and play it back, and it works, but it will not keep on working, and you need some logic and so on. So in total, you have that friction. We want to remove that friction as much as we can. At Brightest side, from the test automation side, we, for example, built our SAP GUI recorder, which basically takes a screen dump of every single element found on that SAP screen. But furthermore, it basically also gives you a selector example. So you don't need to create that selector from scratch, which is a lot faster. But unfortunately, even in that automation part, beyond that automation part, we also have a lot of frictions. Because even if everything is according by the book, properly engineered test automation solves a lot of things like maintenance issues, duplicate code, fragmented logic, traceability issues, flaky execution, and so on, but it cannot solve the friction you get from designing business flows, creating meaningful test cases, and translating that business intent into automation logic. Because engineering provides only the structure, but it doesn't eliminate the effort of flow creation. And that's where our colleagues at SQAI kick in.
Yes, thank you for handing over the mic so cleanly, Seb. I made a few mental notes during your part of the slides, and one of which being the vendor lock-in part. So yeah, we know today that AI is basically everywhere in the also in the software testing scene. And we've seen coding going 10x, and software testing is following suit. But something that we often noticed in the market, if you look at AI-powered testing solutions, is that they're often very ecosystem based, meaning that you're completely locked in into whatever AI ecosystem they put you in. Then again, to tackle the few of the problems that Seb stated now in his latest slide, you would have to resort to some sort of your own AI agent architecture to solve all of those, get context in there, which is a lot of work. You can do it. There are open source frameworks to do it that also offer their AI agents, but it's still an additional form of cognitive load on the test engineers who need to develop and maintain that next to maintaining the actual tests and the low level code that is in there. So provide an appropriate answer to that. 2 years ago, we started developing SQAI Suite, which is an AI-powered software testing platform that enables you to orchestrate AI agents in an open system to which you can connect your most commonly used tools that you already have in your workflow today. So in essence, this means that with SQAI Suite, you're enabled to place virtual colleagues in your teams, like a virtual test engineer, an automation scripter, a test data generator, performance tester, and so on, that you can plug into your existing workflow of applications that you already have, for example, within Azure DevOps or in the future SAP-ALM. Run it on browser stack and so on. You can check out the full scope of our integrations on our website. But what we see as a result, specifically in those migration ERP trajectories, if you look at what the industry standard is of a testing process in that kind of projects, you're looking at of course, the requirements analysis part, maybe some gap analysis in there, the test case creation, automation, scripting, then eventually execution and defect reporting, where SQAI Suite is mainly focused today on the first three blocks, helping you as a human to do that way faster, more accurate, and with more test coverage, and of course cheaper with AI, which is kind of, I think, Seb, what you wanted to explain. Also, next to that, functionally, I already mentioned it in the first slides a little bit, but SQAI is really built to plug into whatever you're using. So we're looking at your mainstream business apps like Confluence, Jira, a very wide QA landscape with a numerous set of test management tool and a whole broad range of test automation frameworks that you already know and use today. And of course, all the places where you can store that code so you can really plug it in no time. You're literally set up in 10 minutes to connect your integration in SQAI Suite, and then you can go ahead and use it in your SAP automation.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Dean. And by combining those, we bring the best of both worlds to SAP automation, and we go from requirements to reliable tests, where AI generates those structured test cases, but not based on just air. It's based on whatever either you put in there, like requirements and so on, but also open source material, like we know the specifications of SAP because they're in the cloud, so we can read them if we like that information. And this causes that we have an actual reduced dependency on manual engineering. We have less repetitive flow creation, we have less manual script scaffolding, because the engineers actually focus on the quality and the architecture and not boilerplating everything. You have less scripting and more scaling, basically, which brings us of course, to the demo, because I'm sure that it's one thing to hear it, but another thing to see it. And for this, I prepared a small video because this gives me a bit more control, and I can pause because something I'm gonna show you 2 scripts here, and I can speed up a bit through the execution itself. So first thing I'm gonna do is I open SQAI, and I ask SQAI, like, okay, please, I've got a test case in 𝗬𝗏. It's called create purchase order, and can you give me the details? So that's where I'll start. And because SQAI in our case is linked to 𝗬𝗏, our test case management system, it sees like, okay, this is your test case. Provides a link there, and indeed this is my test case, which is fine. So I ask back, okay, good. Can you give me 4 negative test cases from this? We want, for example, to leave one field empty, and I should get an error, enter this where this is the missing field. So SQAI takes my initial test case and says like, okay, these are the requested test cases. Do you want me to proceed putting them in 𝗬𝗏? Thinks a bit, and indeed you can see here it created those test cases. So that's for the test case creation part. Let's now dive into the coding part. And here I coupled my Copilot with the MCP protocol of SQAI, and I say like, okay, please get me the test cases from creating a purchase order. And here I'm going to skip a bit because I'm using a very talkative model here, and it's a bit a lot that he talks. But here you can see, for example, he runs the MCP server from SQAI to get my test cases, and he put that information of those test cases in his context. And then I say like, okay, can you now do the purchase order with the empty quantity field? Okay, good. I say this script, that's my start script, that's the positive flow. Can you create my negative flows? And it's working a bit. You can also see, by the way, all the test cases here in the chat. I'm going to skip a bit like this. And here we see like, okay, this is the test case. I noticed that he said, enter a quantity with a dot behind it. It's like, okay, let's test this out, because the actual error message is without the dot. So let's see how this works. I quickly add the tag SQAI to it. This makes it easier to run only that test case. So I put the command here to run everything with the SQAI tag. And now it's running that test case. So it opens SAP, it goes to the manage purchase orders, and then creates the order. And indeed, you get, you get that enter quantity. But as you noticed, it has no dot at the end. So of course, my test case fails. And it says I expected quantity to have a dot, but there's no dot. So I asked, okay, please, SQAI or Copilot in this case, can you do it without the dot? And can you also update the test case on 𝗬𝗏? But here I was thinking, because it generated the test case like this, like this. But I also noticed that he now said, okay, the error message need to equal that, but there are more error messages. So I was actually contemplating of starting my recording again to make it first time right. But I thought, could be nice to leave this in, because then we can also see how it looks like if it really failed, how the reporting is. And indeed, you can see here that the test case also changed without the enter quality, without the dot. So even from Copilot, it can edit your test cases in your test case management system. So again, I ran the test case, and here indeed it said it needs to be equal, but we got more errors, which is fine. And then I went back to test rail where test cases were, and I go to the test run, which just was here, and we see indeed there's a failed test. And our framework also reports whatever we did. So every single action we did, we clicked on an element, we went to a page, and so on. Everything except the actual password we entered is reported. And indeed, we see here we wanted enter quality, but we got more. We got 2 errors rather than only 1. And we finish it off with a small screenshot where our test case ended, where the issue was. And indeed, we can see there are 2 messages, and we only expected 1. Right? So this is basically the flow, how it goes from starting in SQAI, reading the requirements, creating a test case, going to your code, creating a new test script based on the new test cases created. We see there's an error. Okay, let's quickly change that. Huh? Another demo I prepared was on the SAP GUI itself. And just to let you see how exactly it's different. Coding-wise, it's not different. And that's with a certain goal in mind. We want to have those results which are stable, but we want also the architecture from our framework to be the same, so it's easier to switch that context. And to do that, for example, here we see how the elements themselves are created, and they're really stable elements. They're not using huge IDs, such, for example, as the recording capabilities in SAP itself. We're using very concrete selectors to do that, but this causes that overhead, because you need to know how to get those elements, and for that we have the SAP GUI recorder, where, let's say, we go to our create purchase order screen. I'll quickly refresh the recorder, which now takes both a screenshot and an entire element dump on everything that's on the screen. So this might take a while depending on how many elements there actually are on the screen. But as soon as it's done, we'll notice every element here. If we click it, we see, okay, this is the complete attribute. And this is our suggested examples. You can take the full ID, but that's not so good. So we take a partial ID, which is more flexible, or we do it via properties, which is the most readable. So let's, for example, say that we now want to add these 4 text fields into our framework. We can basically say, oh, let's add this one. I'll take the partial ID. Let's take the purchase organizations. Let's take the purchase group, and I just add them all, just pressing the button add. And then we go to the framework builder. I'll put this a bit cleaner. And then we give them names, and we have the 𝗵𝗶 top line super field element, which of course doesn't say a lot, but we know it's this one. It's the supplier text field. So we type supplier text. And we say, okay, let's also generate a send text. Let's add wait for element, because we want to wait before the element is actually there. We want also to have the enter. Of course, you can do that renaming from all the rest. But for now, let's just add those here. And we have perfectly working code, which is very reliable and stable, which makes it much easier to reduce that boilerplate. Now, for some things, it's fine. For example, here we have a screen object which already exists, so we just need to add. But sometimes we actually want to get more. And for this, we built the recording functionality. I'll quickly restart here. And I start recording. This attaches it to the SAP session itself, where if I do some actions now, you can see it in the back that it catches those actions which are sent. So I'm just quickly going to enter some data here, put 001 here, and then 2510. And let's already make it into a test case. Let's say I save this. Oh, it's a faulty document, and because this says document still faulty, cancel that, cancel this as well, press the no button, and we stop recording, right? If we now go to generate code, we see, okay, there are 4 screens which the recorder noticed. You have the SAP Easy Access screen, the Create Purchase Order screen, the Save Faulty Document pop-up, and the Exit Document screen. So now I can customize this. Again, putting more easy-to-read names and so on. Okay, CD input, that's a specific term, that's fine. But on the Create Purchase Order, we again have this 𝗵𝗶 top line super field, which we say, oh, it's the supplier text, for example, and so on. But we also noticed in the recording that you have several green actions, several gray actions. The green actions are the ones we actually think they have certain value, and the gray actions we don't really know. And that's, for example, when we go to the Save Faulty Document screen, because we clicked on the document still faulty, but it doesn't do anything in SAP. So it suggests like, okay, there is an element here which we detected, but there was no action from SAP itself. Do you want to do anything with this? I said, yes, I want to add this, and I want to add a method. We want to get the text because we want to get the actual error message to see if our test case worked. And then, of course, this is one part of the recording, but we want to group this in meaningful functions. For example, at the Create Purchase Order screen, we don't want to say enter EK org, EK group, and so on. No, we want to say we add the PO header, for example. And adding the PO header will first, we need to add a supplier, then the organization, the group, and then the other. And we say, for example, we can add more, and we say export. And then here we have our full screens. Here we have that boilerplate code, which we can just pop into a new class. So here, rather than just saying, oh, I'm adding to this class, I'm just going to create a new screen, put the code here, and it's working code, which then, of course, we can even further enhance with the same capabilities as I just demonstrated before for the SQAI part, where we can create those meaningful functions and add that reusability, which decreases the maintenance, which enables your automation solution to be very engineeringly sound, but then with the SQAI support with it. And of course, if you're interested in how this would look, we can look here at create purchase. This is, for example, to create a purchase order. And if we execute that test, we see, or we should see, not to get ahead of myself, we should see that the SAP Easy Access screen opens and we just run our tests. What you see behind, by the way, the test executor tool is completely optional. It helps you to create certain execution strings, which could help you setting up CI/CD, for example, or running a specific test without having to dive too deeply into the code, again, reducing that friction even more. Here we just created a very easy purchase order, enter the supplier, purchase organization, and so on. We then proceeded to print out the new PO number, and here we can see a very easy example how what we did, all the different steps which we did together with a screenshot, have some metadata at top, how many tests were executed, how many passed, and so on, which is then ready to be exported to your favorite test case management system. So that's everything regarding the demo. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask us.
Yes, let's go through the questions. First one, when creating the test cases, are there separate entities, or did you already link them with the correct requirements? In TestRail, it is not rocket science, but it can also add speed if you can automate this. Is this an option? That's a question for Dean.
I think partially there's also part in there for SIP, but from my part, when you have connected SQAI to your toolings in your workflow, for example, so whatever place you have the requirements stored, they are there. And SQAI can also soft link the test cases it generates out of that by prefixing the test with the actual requirements ID. Do note that you will always have to confirm that link, as that is part of the human in the loop. And sadly enough, the kind of work that the EU AI Act wants us humans to do still. So that's the answer from SQAI side. But I think with regards to your setup, Seb, this might have some broader depth in that question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so basically we want, of course, to link our code as well with our test cases, and that's just, well, depending on the tool. And in TestRail, it just needs the ID of the test case, which then sees which group it's attached to, which then sees which project, and then goes back to the run. In other test case management systems, like for example Azure DevOps, you need both test case ID and group. But that's just to get the results to that tool. Whatever link happens after it, it just respects that because the link is in the tool itself.
Yes. Next one. How much time does this setup save you compared to traditional testing with generalist AI SAP solutions?
Well, it depends. You have, for example, if you want to read in a table, right? And that table is based on coordinates, XY coordinates. That's not enough for robust automation. And here you need to build actual logic, like please get me all the headers, get me all the rows based on this or that, and then make a very good stable way to get certain information out of a table. And this is where we see AI struggle a bit. It can help you say like, okay, give me a function that gets all that header information, gives me a function that does this, and so on. That saves you time. But the real win here is not in those complex test cases. It's in the test cases we have to do every single day, and it's 100 times the same test case or test scripts or the same setup, and this is where you get the most effort. So it's very hard to tell you a certain amount of time, but it's honestly it's easier. It's much easier, and which is very good.
Am I also correct in assuming, just to elaborate on this, SIP, that the big win in time is also in less maintenance and more stable test cases than compared to other solutions?
Yeah, totally, indeed.
Yeah, and I think also additionally, this setup vastly reduces the amount of cognitive load on the actual engineer needing to do the low-level maintenance, meaning that from a testing perspective, your brain will be sharper for the complex stuff.
Yeah, because if you do the same thing all over and over again, your brain just gets dull, and that introduces errors.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Next question. SIP, what is the main role for SQAI Suite in your SAP automation workflow? What integrations do you have set up? What parts do you use the SQAI agents in the browser for? And what part is pure SQAI MCP with VS Code MCP?
Yeah. Great question. Yeah. So our SQAI currently has integrations with both GitHub and TestRail to get the test cases, to push the test cases, to edit test cases. That's all TestRail. For GitHub, it's to make certain pull requests and so on. Where we use SQAI agents for browser is basically both two main parts. First of all, to generate the test cases, that's one. But another thing, which is not to be underestimating, is figuring out behavior. We see something happening and we don't know if it's actually supposed to happen that way or if it's a bug. You have a lot of times that you need to figure out what's going on here. And this is also where we use SQAI, like, oh, we see this, is this correct behavior? And then SQAI will answer like, okay, according to this exact requirement, this is correct. And then we click the requirement and we actually see, oh, this is why it's happening. Because in very large complex systems like SAP, it's just hard to know everything. You see things happening and you just don't know if it's supposed to be that way or not. And that's where SQAI helps us a lot.
That's the context which is built in SQAI then.
Indeed.
Yeah. Additionally, I can also add to that when it comes to getting context in SQAI, because of course your test cases need to come from somewhere. We see our customers, for example, live connect their Microsoft SharePoint instances where they have a bunch of handover documents from their ERP supplier or manuals or even workflows described in Microsoft Visio, for example, that they attach to SQAI or live requirements that live in other platforms as well. So you can really build a nice context base.
Yeah, you also see often historically built Excels with a lot of business scenarios and content in there describing all the end-to-end business scenarios, which is also very good context for SQAI to look at. Yes, another question. How performant is this setup together with SAP modules? Does it slow down your own system? Do you need a very performant system to have this setup?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. So SQAI-wise, there's, I think, but I'm looking at Dean, not really performance issue because it's in the cloud, right?
Yeah, our load is distributed, so that
Yeah.
doesn't really matter. We just auto scale, no problem.
Yeah. And then regarding the automation part internally, we did a lot of proof of concepts before coming to this solution. The first one was purely based on OCR, sorry, image recognition, and so on, which are visually very intensive things to do. So that's why we built this solution, which attaches itself to the SAP running process, which we just fire off Visual Basic script. So it's just using whatever SAP has. So it doesn't really have a lot of load, unless, of course, you're doing a lot of visual things like image recognition, like for example, when you just looked at the setup or the test script just now, you notice that some steps have a little pause between them. That's because it's taking a screenshot, and I'm running a quite big resolution here, so it takes time, but you can reduce that. But the SAP automation itself doesn't need to be very performant.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. If there still are questions, of course, you can always reach out to either Dean or SEP or Brightest Academy. Always in are fine. We will redirect to the one who needs to answer any question which might pop up. So thank you all again. Thank you, SEP and Dean, for this nice demo and also the co-working between our two companies. It's really nice to move ahead with this and to make sure this is a real good solution for everything concerning SAP test automation, which has been a hassle for a few years already for us as SAP. So thank you both, and thank you all for joining, and hope to see you next time.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you everyone for your attention. Bye.
Bye bye.